They stared at my rusted-out pickup like it was a punchline. I wasn't invited to impress anyone, I just came for my friend. But when the groom's father pulled me aside during the toast and said, "Can we talk privately?" the laughter stopped cold. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who I really was. My name is Daniel Trent, and this is the story of how one wedding reception in rural Georgia flipped everything. How I went from the broke guest with bad boots to the man they whispered about long after the cake was cut. I grew up in a town where people didn't leave. Not because they loved it, because they couldn't afford to. My dad was a mechanic, and my mom cleaned houses. We didn't have much, but I learned early what work felt like: heavy, sweaty, and honest. By 13, I was helping Dad rebuild engines. By 16, I was doing oil changes on half the town's trucks. I didn't get to play football or go to prom. I was too busy trying to keep our lights on. No college fund, no inheritance, just grit. Most people around me settled. I didn't. I saved every dime I could, learned everything I could online, and spent my nights building tools out of scraps, automating tiny garage processes. Nothing fancy, just practical stuff no one else bothered to improve. I had no degree, no startup funds, no connections, but I had ideas. And I had time. Fast forward to 33, I still live modestly. I still drive that same beat-up 1996 pickup. Part stubbornness, part nostalgia. It's scratched, loud, and refuses to die. Kind of like me. So when my best friend Mason asked me to be his +1 at his cousin's wedding, I said yes. I don't go to many parties, but Mason's family always treated me kind. Or so I thought. It was a garden wedding, white tents, string lights, champagne glasses that cost more than my monthly groceries. I pulled up in my truck behind a line of polished BMWs and spotless Teslas. People stared like I'd parked a tractor in the ballroom. Mason ran up, grinning. "You made it, man." But even he looked a little nervous as we walked past the hedge-lined entrance. I didn't wear a suit. I wore what I always wear. Clean denim, tucked shirt, work boots. I shined myself. The glances started slow. Side eyes, raised brows. One woman actually said, "The staff entrance is around back." I smiled politely. "I'm a guest." Inside the tent, the music played soft jazz and smelled like imported orchids. Mason's aunt, a woman who once gave me lemonade when I was a kid, didn't even shake my hand. She just said, "Still working with your hands, Daniel?" "Every day," I replied, unfazed. "You?" She blinked, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. Later, when the dancing started, I stayed back, watched, listened. One of the bridesmaids whispered to another, "Who's that guy?" "He came in a rust bucket." The other laughed. "Might be the caterer's friend." I didn't say anything. I never do when I'm underestimated. I've learned that silence is a better setup than defense. But all that changed when the groom's father, Mr. Grayson, walked past the guests straight toward me. "You Daniel Trent?" he asked. "Yes, sir. We need to talk. Privately." We stepped away from the music and murmurs, past the tent's edge into the garden path, lit dimly with string lights and soft lanterns. Mr. Grayson walked slowly, like a man thinking through each step. He didn't speak until we were well out of earshot. He turned to me, voice low but sharp. "Are you the same Daniel Trent from Dalton? Your father's shop was off 9th Street?" I nodded. "That's right." He paused. "He fixed my cousin's Ford Bronco back in the day. Said your kid was the one who actually found the problem." He looked at me hard. "That was you." "Yeah, I remember that Bronco. Bad transmission ground. Took me a while to catch." He gave a quiet whistle. That cousin still talks about it like you walked on water. I smiled politely but stayed quiet. I still didn't know where this was going. I've been looking into a few automation solutions for my facilities, he said, suddenly businesslike. Your name came up in a private referral. Someone in logistics down in Savannah said, if you want lean systems that actually work, track down Daniel Trent. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't know I had a fan club. I did some digging, he continued. You don't advertise. You don't pitch. But your work's in 5 warehouses across the state. None of it stamped with your name. I shrugged. That's intentional. He gave a slow nod. I respect that. You build tools, solve problems, and disappear. But I'm not looking for ghosts. I'm looking for partners, people who can think long-term. I stared at him. Behind the tailored suit and million-dollar smile, he looked genuinely intrigued. Curious, not condescending. I don't usually take meetings at weddings, I said with a smirk. He laughed. Fair, but I'd hate to leave here not knowing if there's a chance to work together. I didn't commit, but I didn't shut it down either. Send over your challenges. If I think I can help, I'll follow up. Fair enough, he said, extending his hand. And for the record, Daniel, you've got more composure than half the CEOs I've sat with. We shook hands. I could feel eyes on us from across the lawn. By the time we returned to the tent, something had changed. People weren't just glancing at me. They were analyzing. Like they had missed something obvious and were scrambling to figure it out. Even the bridesmaid who called my truck a rust bucket looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Back at the table, Mason leaned in. Dude, what was that? Mr. Grayson just told the groom he had an exciting business lead, and pointed at you. I chuckled. Guess I'm the after party. Mason stared at me. Why didn't you say you knew him? I didn't. He knew me. That's the thing about keeping your head down and letting your work speak. Eventually, it speaks to the right people, even if the wrong ones are still laughing. Dinner was served not long after, but I'd lost my appetite. I'd spent years learning how to work in the shadows, and now the spotlight felt too bright, too fast. At the head table, the groom clinked his glass and gave a toast about gratitude, family, and the blessings of marrying into success. His fiancée's father beamed, like he'd trained the boy well. Mr. Grayson, however, sat 2 seats away, eyes occasionally drifting in my direction. Thoughtful. Across the room, whispers spread like spilled wine. People who'd dismissed me earlier were suddenly curious. Someone snapped a photo of me pretending not to notice. Another guest leaned over and asked Mason, "Is your friend an investor or something?" "He's just Daniel," Mason replied, loyal, awkward, and perfect. Then came the moment that turned the mood from curious to chaotic. The bride's brother, Jared, clean-shaven, teeth too white, stood up to give a speech. Drunk on entitlement and premium whiskey, he launched into a roast disguised as a tribute. "We've got all kinds here tonight," he said, slurring slightly. Doctors, lawyers, real estate moguls, and one guy who showed up looking like he just changed a tractor's oil. Laughter rippled. I didn't move. Jared smiled like a frat boy who just keyed your car. "But hey, we love a good blue-collar hustle, right? Salt of the earth. Might even let him valet next time." More laughter. Mason turned to me, panicked. "You want me to say something?" "No," I said calmly. "He's building his own moment." Mr. Grayson didn't laugh. His jaw tightened. Then Jared made the mistake that flipped the entire night. He turned toward his father. "Dad, maybe you can get him a job loading boxes at your plant, huh?" Silence. Everyone looked at Mr. Grayson, then at me, then back at Jared. Mr. Grayson stood up. Slow, measured, like gravity had changed just for him. He adjusted his cufflinks, cleared his throat, and said loud enough for all to hear, "Son, if you're going to insult someone, make sure they're not the reason we're getting a new logistics framework next quarter." The room froze. He turned to me. "Daniel, my team will be calling you Monday. We'd like to move quickly." Gasps. Actual gasps. Jared's mouth opened and closed like a stunned fish. Someone dropped a fork. Then, as if fate couldn't resist twisting the knife, the DJ, blissfully unaware, cued the dance track. Music poured over the silence like a bad joke. I stood up, nodded politely to Mr. Grayson, and walked out into the open air. Mason followed. Outside, I exhaled. The tension slid off me like rain off metal. I looked back at the glowing tent, still buzzing with confusion. Mason shook his head. "Man, that was savage." "No," I said softly. "That was overdue." We sat on the stone bench near the parking lot, away from the noise, under an oak tree that had probably watched 100 other weddings before this one. The moonlight bounced off my truck's scratched hood. Mason was quiet, and I let him be. Some moments are best left to settle in silence. After a few minutes, he finally asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me, man? About your work, the systems you've built, all that?" I looked at him, not annoyed, just honest. "Would it have changed anything between us?" He thought for a second. I don't think so." "That's why I didn't." He nodded. "Still, you could have at least made me ride in something with functioning air conditioning." We both laughed. But behind the laughter, I could feel the gravity of what had happened. It wasn't just that Jared embarrassed himself, or that Mr. Grayson stood up for me. It was that the whole illusion shattered. The story those people had told themselves about who I was, what I was worth. It cracked. Loudly. Publicly. Not everyone came out to apologize. Most avoided eye contact. But 2 of the older guests did. A retired teacher who used to substitute at my high school came up and said, "I always knew you'd surprise people." I thanked her. She smiled like she was watching her own son grow up. The bridesmaid who made the rust bucket joke, she hovered nearby but never spoke. That was fine. Some apologies come too late to matter. Jared, though, wasn't done. As we headed back inside for dessert, he cornered me near the buffet table, voice lowered. "You think you're better than us now?" I didn't flinch. I never thought I was better. I just didn't agree that I was worse. "You embarrassed me," he hissed. "No, Jared," I said, keeping my voice even. "You embarrassed yourself. I just let the silence do the rest." He stormed off. Mason handed me a glass of water, muttering, "You've got more restraint than I ever will." Inside the tent, things slowly returned to their forced version of normal. A few people offered small talk. Some asked vague questions about what exactly it is you do. I gave them simple, polite answers. The point had already been made. The bride came over near the end of the night. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you get from dancing, but the kind that comes when your whole foundation wobbles a little. "I'm sorry about Jared," she said. "And everything." I nodded. "It's your night. I hope you can still enjoy it." "You could have humiliated him," she said. "You didn't. I don't need to win like that." She looked at me for a moment longer, then nodded and walked away. She wouldn't forget tonight. None of them would. Back outside, I leaned against my truck, the same one they'd laughed at. Mason stood next to me and said, "You know they're going to tell this story for years, right?" Good, I said. Let it remind them. I didn't leave right away. I waited until the tent lights dimmed and the last of the overpriced sparklers fizzled out. The DJ packed up his gear. Caterers swept crumbs and silent judgments into silver bins. The wedding was over, but the echo of what happened would outlast the music. Mason offered to ride back with me, but I told him to stay. You've got people here, I said. I've got peace. He smiled and nodded. Text me when you get home. I promised I would. Driving down the narrow country road, engine humming like an old friend, I let it all soak in. The disrespect, the reveal, the silence afterward. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was something deeper, a kind of closure I didn't know I'd been waiting on. For years, I'd watched people measure others by their shoes, their job titles, their cars, and I had quietly decided not to participate in that game. But tonight, I learned something else. When the truth reveals itself in public, it doesn't need a megaphone. Dignity is louder than pride. Silence, handled well, can be deafening. At home, I stepped out of the truck, gravel crunching beneath my boots. My dog barked once and settled. The porch light flickered, still half broken. I liked it that way. Real things should never shine too perfectly. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold beer and stared at the worn-out to-do list pinned to my fridge. A new item came to mind, and I wrote it down. Keep letting the work speak first. The next morning I got a call, Mr. Grayson's team, eager to talk specifics. I agreed to meet, but on my terms. No flashy boardroom, no sales pitch, just a cup of coffee at the local diner where I take all my first meetings. Later that day, Mason called. Dude, it's blowing up. What is? He sent me a screenshot. A wedding guest had posted a TikTok. The guy everyone mocked turned out to be the one their dad wants to work with. Over 200,000 views, dozens of comments saying things like, "This is why you treat everyone with respect." I turned off the screen. Validation was nice, but it wasn't why I kept my head down all these years. I did it for the work, for the problem solving, for the pride in building something real. I've always believed that you don't need to prove yourself to people who refuse to see you. But sometimes, when the curtain drops and the truth walks on stage, the audience remembers your name. And that's enough. If you've ever been laughed at, dismissed, or underestimated because of how you looked, what you drove, or where you came from, keep going. Keep building. Because one day the same people who mocked your truck might find themselves wondering how to get a seat beside you. Just make sure your silence is strong enough to hold the weight of your worth. Has anyone ever underestimated you, only to realize later who you really are?